He's written for numerous media outlets, including the New York Times, Politico, and NBCnews.com. He's an alumnus of the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at the City University of New York. We also have joining us Robin Washington. Robin was NABJ's elected parliamentarian from '99 to 2003 and has served in the role on an ad hoc occasion since then. Robin hosts a weekly public affairs show on Wisconsin Public Radio and contributes to WGBH Boston and American City Business Journals. He previously was editor for the Duluth News Tribune. So thank you both for joining us. I also want to thank Angela Holcomb, who's the executive assistant for NABJ, who's running the technology for us tonight. So for all of you who are on the chat, if you would like to ask a question, you can do so at the bottom. If you see the bottom, you hover over the bottom, you'll see Q&A. That's how you ask an anonymous question. Just type the question in and I'll present it to the panelist. If you want to type a question that anyone can see, you see the chat at the bottom, just type in the chat box. We all can see the question, but I'll still present it to the panelist. Again, anonymous question for the Q&A box, type it at the bottom. And the public question that anyone can see, type it in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. So the first question, the first topic we want to go over is chapter rulemaking. Can you, Corey, can you talk about some of the basic rules chapters must understand, such as president, vice president, being national members, bonding? Those are some issues that have been raised to me as regional director that some chapters are unclear about. So let's talk about who can hold offices in chapters. Corey, you're on mute. You're on mute, Corey.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
So thanks everyone for joining us, and good question, Tori. So NABJ has a few key requirements that all chapters must abide by to maintain their affiliation status. So chapter presidents and vice presidents, as you said, must be full-time members of NABJ. And this has been a long-running requirement for all chapters. And the remaining officers, that mean they could be the parliamentarian, treasurer, other officers must be NABJ members. And another requirement is that chapters must submit their annual audit each year to the national office. The deadline for students is November the 1st. Professional chapters have a December the 1st deadline. So the audit pretty much helps the national office and the board to keep track of our chapters and to know which ones are in good standing and to identify the ones that, that might need some help. So it's very important that, you know, chapters try to submit their annual audit to the national office. Just Google search NABJ audit and then you will see the information pops up. And if your chapters haven't submitted their audit last fall, please do so as soon as possible. And another requirement is that chapter treasurers must be bonded. So the benefit is that it gives some assurance to like your financial supporters that the treasurer will honestly execute their responsibilities. And it also gives some assurance to your financial supporters, again, that their money is safe with the chapter. And in the event that the treasurer mishandle the chapter funds, the bond will sort of guarantee that, you know, the chapter will receive some restitution up to the amount of the bond. So those are the main. Those are like the key requirements. And of course, chapters must hold elections. I won't call any names, but it's a great disservice if you're running an organization that is not having, that is not holding elections. NABJ doesn't state like how often chapters must hold election, but the NABJ handbook recommends that an officer serve no more than 2 or 3 consecutive terms. As you guys know, elections are extremely important because it allows their members to take an active role in the leadership of the organization, and it helps you to bring new ideas to the table and new talents, and to help the chapter evolve and evolve with time and grow.
Thank you, Corey. I have a question. I'm going to be answering questions from the audience as we go through. One of the questions for an anonymous attendee says, with all the changes going on in journalism, it's hard enough to just find members. So if we have a member who wants to step up to leadership and they're not a working journalist, why can't they help lead? Robin or Corey, either one could answer that.
Oh, they can. Hi, I'm Robin, and thrilled to be here. Glad to see all of you here. And Corey may have, I'll just say, misspoken a little bit. The president and the vice president must be full members of NABJ. No question about that. Those are NABJ rules. Been that way for 20 years or so. But that means your other officers don't have to be. So they can be associate members of NABJ or student members or not members at all. That means that you have all sorts of leadership opportunities for people who are not working journalists to step into. And that's normal. Don't think your chapter is the only one. Many chapters have that.
Well, NABJ requires all officers to be NABJ members. It's just that you don't have to be a full-time working journalist. So if you're secretary, parliamentarian, what else exists? There's three: secretary, parliamentarian, treasurer. You don't have to be a full-time journalist, but if you're an officer on that board, you have to be an NABJ member. And so how would you all respond to the question? I've gotten this before, like it's hard enough just to get people to step up. Why do they need to be a full-time working journalist if they're willing to lead a chapter? Why is that so important?
This is a tough one, and I think this is something that NABJ has to definitely try to tackle, because the industry's the industry is evolving. Some people are transferring to like media-related fields. So obviously those members or like media professionals cannot hold like a vice president or president position in a local chapter. Maybe NABJ has to tweak those rules, but right now we have to just abide by what their requirements are. In the meantime, they can create committees and task forces, and those are opportunities that they can utilize to keep those members who are interested in leadership to engage.
Okay, thank you. Question from Benet Wilson. Question for Corey. We are in the process of revising our bylaws. Does NABJ/you look over our changes, or are we on our own?
No, feel free to reach out to me and the national office anytime. Right now, I'm in the process of actually assisting 2 chapters. Last fall, I've helped New York and the Hampton Roads chapter. So feel free to reach out, and we're here to help, offer some support and guidance. So you're not going to be on your own if you want to review the bylaws. Okay. How can
chapters reach you, Corey? What's the best way to reach you?
My contact information is online, but it's Corey, KHORRI.Atkinson1@gmail.com.
Thank you.
And you can find me on Twitter, Atkinson Reports.
Okay, thank you. Again, for anyone joining the meeting late, if you'd like to ask a question of our panelists, if you hover at the bottom of your screen and you click Q&A, that's how you can ask an anonymous question. Just type it in and I'll read it to the panelists. Or if you want to ask a public question, type it in chat. We'll all be able to see it, but I'll still read it to the panelists. Question from Madison Carter, new president of our Buffalo chapter. Madison asks, can you go through the verbal process for proposing a motion and having it approved, or what happens if it is not approved? What types of items need to be submitted as a motion? What items can a president just put in place, if anything? Did you understand the question?
This was on our agenda. Should we jump ahead or just answer it now?
Just go ahead. Yeah, but just go ahead and answer it. I'm going to answer questions as we go through.
Okay. Well, let's see if this works. I wanted to share my screen because I have 3 scenarios. So does everybody see that?
No.
No?
No.
How about that? You see
Yes.
that?
Yes.
All right. Happened. I mean, I think making a motion by saying I move or I move that, and you say whatever we want to say. Chair says that it calls for a second. If there is a second, somebody says I second that motion or second. Yes, question?
No, go ahead, Robin.
Okay. All right, and then it's moved and seconded. Then you have a discussion, and then you may have amendments to that motion, or you can finish your discussion and have a vote on that motion, and there it becomes your rule. Question that was just asked here, by the way,
Robin,
was
Robin.
does everything need to
Robin.
be submitted as a motion, or can? Yep.
Your sound is going in and out. Could you?
Am I not coming through?
Yeah. Could you? Maybe it's because it's split screen. I don't know. But can you close that split screen? Your sound is warbled.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So now, can you hear me again?
Yes.
All right. It's going to be a little difficult without the graphic, but so you basically, yes, the question that you had of does everything have to be submitted as a motion? Not everything does. If you have a trivial item that says, I'm trying to think of what might be a trivial item. If it's not involving funds, if it's not involving the actions of what you do as an organization or something like that, then it doesn't necessarily have to be a motion. The other thing is that the chair of the meeting does wield a lot of power to decide, as Corey did with this meeting. There was an agenda, right? The chair decides what you're going to discuss in the first place, although somewhere in that agenda, it should have a provision for new business, which you've all seen. So it's not everything just handed down by the chair. So, but the other thing is a wise president should be careful about putting everything out there for a vote, not necessarily because they're going to be voted down, but because they just may not be matters that the organization really needs to have a vote about. Again, if it's something, the reason I hesitate for trying to come up with something very trivial, because sometimes very trivial things can get to be very important. There was an example of a parliamentary training film where they use purchasing of donuts, and you may seem like that's kind of silly, and they even had an amendment to say, well, we want it to be sprinkled donuts. But believe me, when you start getting into the money of the organization and how it affects what you buy or something like that, sprinkled donuts might actually be important enough to bring to a vote. So, I mean, you use your common sense, but you take a pulse of the room too. That's the other thing. If everybody came in there agreeing on something in the first place, then you don't necessarily need to have a whole long discussion and vote to get them to decide what they've already decided. How about that for a short answer?
Okay. There's also, it's been brought up in a previous chapter of mine, you mentioned funding. That's a very important topic of not having to go to your full board every time and vote for when you need money. One thing I know people have considered is having a small spending limit, let's say $100. And if you're spending less than $100, it's in the bylaws now. If you're spending less than $100, you might just go to like a committee that you formed, like a finance committee, to let them know. But every month, the full membership should get a spending report anyway. So you don't have to worry about someone spending $1 million on donuts or what have you.
That's correct. As long as you have like a good practice would be an amount that that committee can approve, or that the president or vice president can solely sign checks up to a certain amount, $100, it depends on your market, by the way. A check for $500 in New York is not going to buy as much as $500 in St. Louis or something like that too.
Do you recommend that the president, since you're talking about money, do you recommend that the president be a signatory on checks?
2 people should be a signatory on checks. That I highly recommend. It is actually bad practice to have anything less than 2 people. That being said, it doesn't always have to be the president. In fact, in some cases, it might be good practice not to be the president, because if the president is busy running the organization, doing all kinds of things, first of all, how accessible is that person for a two-person signature when you get into physical checks? By the way, I personally don't use physical checks at all, so it is difficult right there. But secondly, you may, by having, say, the secretary and treasurer be the two signatories, that actually puts a check and balance on the president. But that being said, the president is the person who lives, eats, and breathes this organization, as all of you know. And so you don't really want to be looking around for where's the secretary, is she on deadline today, or whatever. You know, this president, I mean, we are trusting the person with something. And again, if you have two signatures, it should put the necessary check and balance.
Okay, thank you. Again, for those who are joining us late, if you'd like to ask a question of the panelists, if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you can type it in Q&A. That's an anonymous question that I will read to the panelists. If you want to type a question that anyone can see, you can type it in the chat box. We'll all see it, but I'll still present it to the panelists. Next up, let's talk about how to run a meeting. What types of things should be done before a meeting? And also, can we talk about, do you need a motion to call a meeting to order? And do you need a motion to adjourn a meeting? You want to hop on that?
I'll let Corey go to the basics of running a meeting, but
Okay.
I'll answer your specific questions there. You certainly don't need a motion to call a meeting to order because the meeting hasn't started yet. So therefore, if you don't have a quorum in the room, if you're not even sure who's in the room, if the president isn't in the room, you know, it's pretty hard to call a meeting to order with things not quite set yet. The president takes, again, did I say a pulse of the room? One of the pulses of the room to figure out who's in it and look around and see if you have a quorum. The quorum, by the way, is defined by your own constitution or your own bylaws first before you go to other documents that may say what a quorum is. But in any case, yes, the president or the person leading the meeting, by the way, if it's 10 after or 20 after and the president hasn't showed and you know it was Super Tuesday and that person covers election, the president probably not going to show. So the vice president might want to call the meeting to order. As far as ending the meeting, a motion to adjourn, which can only requires a simple majority, is necessary to end the meeting. You get into some funny situations, by the way, if you lose a quorum before the meeting ends. So I've had that happen, or I've seen it about to happen. And before that last person walks out of the room, I say, wait, is there a motion to adjourn? Otherwise, we technically are on this meeting forever. We don't want to do that.
Do you have to approve the agenda? And do you have to have an agenda? I've heard of some meetings where there's just no agenda, just a free flow. Do you have to have an agenda at a meeting?
It's a good practice to have one because you look right now, if we didn't know what we were talking about, it'd be a free for all, right? And so, and secondly, you know, give the president some props that that person wants to have some degree of control. This person volunteered all this time, right? How much are we getting paid? Nothing, I hope. And so, you know, you want certain things to be accomplished. You want that forum to come off. You want, you know, the speaker to show up or something like that. You don't have an agenda. Somebody's going to come in there with their own agenda, pun intended, right? And they will hijack your agenda, or more important, the agenda of the organization. Okay,
thank you. Minutes, talk about minutes, what to do before, during, and after a meeting regarding minutes.
So, so regarding minutes, I think, you know, minutes is a very important part of parliamentary, crucial part of parliamentary procedures. You don't necessarily need to create like a transcript of the meeting. So pretty much Robert rules, you know, recommend that the secretary just take a record of the action items, of the key items that that were like key discussions or things that are action items that that members voted on. So he doesn't necessarily need to take, you know, write everything what people say like word for word. It just like a quick record of what took place.
Do they always have to be written minutes? I mean, in this day and age, I know some people record and say, you know, this is a recording, even like say for conference calls. So they always have to be written minutes.
Do we need newspapers?
I'm a newspaper, so I like print. So,
Do
but
we need books? Yes. Short answer is yes. Because one of the things with the minutes is, as Corey said, it is not expected that you have every single thing in there. And in fact, in a recording, you will have every single thing in there. And how many people, I'm doing it right now, I work in radio, I work in, how many people transcribe interviews? Is that a lot of fun? You want to go through all that to see if you voted for sprinkled donuts or, French crullers, right? No, you don't. So if it's written down, you'll be able to check that. And that segues into the important part of minutes. It's not just somebody takes it down and we file them away forever. No, the next meeting, our minutes are presented from the last meeting. And you are supposed to, it is incumbent upon you, to all of us, to look at them and make sure they're correct. And if it said you voted for sprinkled donuts and you didn't, correct it there, it's going to be in that record forever. And if it turns out there was something wrong with those sprinkles, your fault.
Okay, thank you. Corey, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and earlier you said about how to run a meeting effectively. I think we're all communicators. We have busy lives, so I think it's good practice to update, to give the membership at least 3 weeks. I would say notice of the upcoming meeting, so people can be informed and get excited and prepare themselves for the meeting. Of course, you definitely need an agenda, as Robin says. It's a crucial part of parliamentary process, and it helps to to make to run the meeting more efficiently, and keeps everything. It brings some some formality. And another thing that I also want to stress during meeting is that before you take once the meeting has been called to order, it is always important to remember that if you want to speak, you should always raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged by the person who's running the meeting, because you can be disruptive, and and you have to show and you definitely have to show some respect to the chair. So you have to wait until a chair to give you the floor in order to speak.
Should the bylaws say, you talked about when you should advertise the meeting? I know some chapters bylaws say that 10 days or 14 days before you have to advertise to the members. Talk about why that's a good practice, or do you think it doesn't matter at all, that whether it's in the bylaws?
I would hesitate in putting that in too much of those kind of details into the bylaws. Your bylaws are supposed to be your basic framework for what your organization does and how it intends to accomplish what it does. So you don't want to get into the minutia of do we meet every Tuesday? I mean, you might say, by the way, I will say, for instance, the Boston Association of Black Journalists forever had its meetings the second Tuesday of the month at 7:30 at the Harriet Tubman House. The important part about that, as much as some people complain who work nights, is that everybody knew that, but it wasn't in our bylaws. It was a practice. And I think they finally changed it, by the way, to Saturday. But so you want to have your major things, what your president does, how long your term is, when that president is elected. Those kind of calendar items should be in it. But the little things like, by the way, I just said Super Tuesday happened, right? So we're journalists. So what if you had in your bylaws that you met 7:30 on Tuesday? Who would have met last night who's a political reporter? Nobody. So that means that you would have had to change your bylaws or have some kind of special motion that would override the bylaws for that meeting. And you don't, look, this is all volunteer. The biggest commodity of all of this is time. And who has time for an extra half hour at a meeting to decide when you're going to have the meeting that's not going to be Super Tuesday? And trust me, that change would take at least a half hour, because everybody would be talking about, well, I've got to go to such and such, and I can't do it on Wednesdays, and so no. And I would say, for your best practice, you want to go by how you have been practicing, but not everything has to be written down in stone.
Okay, thank you. I was more getting into how far in advance meetings have to be advertised, and I know that some bylaws will say you have to let people know about your meetings 10 days in advance or 14 days in advance. Are you saying that you wouldn't put that in the bylaws either?
I wouldn't put it in the bylaws. I
Okay.
mean, you can, but
Yeah.
I would say from the various chapters I've been involved in, again, everybody in Boston knew when that meeting was. It doesn't mean that they all could make it, and it doesn't mean everybody agreed, but you knew when it was.
Okay.
And so the last thing you need is somebody pointing to a document and saying, well, it shouldn't be here. And, you know, those are not the real time for elections. Yes, if you say you have a 2-year term and you don't state in your bylaws when that term ends or begins, that's going to be a problem, because somebody might have a 2.5-year term. Somebody might have 1 year, 9 months. So those are the things I think you codify.
Okay.
Or you can have an operating procedures just like NABJ that kind of gives how often the board should meet, and if you feel the need to have you know, like the time or how many weeks in advance should members should be noticed, I would recommend putting that in the operating procedures, which is way easier to amend. Is just you can just call a quick board meeting and ask the board to make changes. But I don't think it's really a requirement to put that in the bylaws, as Robin says.
So what's the difference between bylaws and operating procedures?
You just hit on a point where this is important to understand. For parliamentary procedure, the two parliamentarians don't necessarily agree. NABJ has bylaws and operating procedures, and the bylaws are like a firm constitution that has to be approved by the membership only. The operating procedures are actually, as a shorthand word, is board operating procedures, and it says what the board can do. And so Corey, as a member of the board, can make a motion and get a change to the operating procedures that's voted on by majority rule of the board. That's a lot easier than changing the Constitution, which has to be done by the membership, can only happen once a year at the annual meeting and such. That being said, that makes sense for the national organization. I'm not so sure you need 2 documents. This is where we might disagree. For a local organization. Again, sense of the room, sense of your membership. If you know everybody, the majority of people are political reporters, you probably don't want to have Tuesday meetings, right? So going into it in the first place. But I think one governance document is enough for most small organizations.
Okay, thank you. For those of you who joined the chat late, if you'd like to ask an anonymous question of our panelists, I keep saying that, keep repeating this. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A. You can type your question in there. It'll be anonymous, and I'll read it to the panelists. If you don't care, you can type it in chat. That's a public question. Everyone will see it, and I'll still read it to the panelists. Can we talk? You talked about this a little bit before, Robin, about making a motion, and there are steps in here. Do you feel like we need to address that, or feel like you've answered that fully?
Yeah, we did talk about it a bit before, but let me get into like a broad, you can cut me off, you can ring a timer bell or something like that.
Okay.
But the whole reason why we have parliamentary procedure in the first place, and that gets into how you make a motion, how you use it. It's simply a set of rules that we all agree to that we'll abide by while we're in that meeting, or to be in this organization, or whatever. Indeed, to be in the United States of America, we got a constitution. We all, swear allegiance, or well, actually, we don't have to do that. Thank God, not yet. But we do abide by the Constitution. It does rule over us. So do local laws, state, federal, whatever. So the whole purpose of parliamentary procedure is rules to make this happen. And each one of us could go to a meeting and shout out that I like sprinkled donuts. That's great. And people may know you. You may have a wonderful personality, and you can convince everybody in the room. But we have to have some mechanism that brings order to it. That's why it's called Robert's Rules of Order, right? To introduce your donut issue. Because there may be somebody else who's very quiet, who is actually, very shy, even though they're like a great reporter out there, who may not have a strong voice to say something about, or is embarrassed to say she likes sprinkled donuts, right? So if you have, everybody have to have the same rules they abide by, that they make a motion. Most motions pass by majority rule, but some have to have 2/3. It's a 2/3 motion to end debate, which means to stop discussing. Why? Because it means really the whole room has to pretty much agree we don't need to discuss this anymore. Because as I said, that minority of people who might be shy, who may not feel empowered enough. So, but for the most part, most motions are passed by majority rule. By the way, a provision to change your constitution should have a supermajority too, or your bylaws. And unfortunately, many of our local chapters don't. They say that this constitution or bylaws may be amended by majority vote. That's bad practice. That means if there's only 20 people in the organization and 6 showed up to a meeting and 3 of them, or you get the idea, they could change the entire constitution. You don't want that. So I just want to give an overview of why we have the rules and how they're supposed to work. They are supposed to protect the minority from the tyranny, if you will, of the majority.
Thank you. Question. Let's say a vote occurs, someone votes, the majority say yes, one person says no. Can that, after the vote occurs, can that person be questioned as to why'd you vote that way?
So what you just got into is one of my pet peeves of parliamentary procedure, a lot of alliteration there, which is the friendly amendment. Because of the technical difficulties with the sound, I won't share the documents, but I can send them to everybody afterwards. You'll find them amusing. Okay. I wrote them just for this. And they are scenarios in which somebody says that they want to, actually, I will read this, bear with me, please. Off the screen. I move that we purchase an ad in the Blackwater Blues, the yearbook of the Snatchback University, to show support for our student members. Okay. And the chair says, is there a second? Someone says second. Okay. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? And then someone says, it's Backwater Blues, not Blackwater. And I offer a friendly amendment to correct that. And the chair says, does the maker of the motion agree? And the maker of the motion says, I think so, because they don't know, right? Why a friendly amendment is, and I keep railing about this, bad practice, and this will get to your question, is because if that person agrees, everything's fine and they go on. But if that person doesn't agree, what if it turns out, by the way, there are 2 publications. There's a Backwater Blues and there's a Blackwater Blues. Trust me, I've seen scenarios where something like that exists, right? And that this person who made that second motion is actually trying to sneak in something else, right? But the point is, if you have this thing called a friendly amendment and the person doesn't agree, it just became unfriendly, i.e. hostile. And the other point of parliamentary procedure, in addition to protecting minority from the tyranny of the majority and giving us rules, a framework to work on, is to take the emotion out of whatever it is you're doing. So we don't know really why the person wants to support the Blackwater Blues in the first place. We don't know why the person necessarily, if indeed that person is correcting a mistake or has another agenda. But if you don't have this friendly amendment, what happened here is the second person would say, it's Backwater Blues. I offer an amendment to correct that. Then that would get a second. And now you would be discussing that. If that passes, then you go back to the main motion or whether or not you buy an ad. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. The whole point, you saying, if somebody came out afterwards and said, why were you against? There are many cases where people practicing good parliamentary procedure, you don't know where I really stood. All you know is what I said, what I proposed. If in fact, in my Blackwater thing, the second person came up and had a motion to change it to Backwater Blues. It got a second. Then they discussed that. It passes. The maker of the first motion might vote against it because she may say, well, wait a minute. I'm not sure that Backwater Blues is the publication I want to support. And therefore, she votes against her main motion. See what I mean? So the whole point is not to say everybody needs to have a poker face, but the procedures should allow you to make your case without getting into your motion, without people reading your motion, worrying about your motion.
But is it a violation of parliamentary procedure for you to be questioned? And I'm asking because this has come up before. You vote, some person votes a certain way, then someone doesn't agree, and that person, the person who voted against, is questioned about the vote during the meeting. So the vote takes place, it passes, or whatever, and I say, Robin, why'd you vote that way during the meeting? Am I allowed to question you about your vote? Or does that violate parliamentary procedure, Robert's rules, or whatever?
That's not parliamentary procedure. That's called bad home training.
Okay.
You don't do that. And in fact, it's a matter of order that somebody could say, you'll hear all these crazy parliamentary terms. One is I rise for a motion of personal privilege. It means it's about something to do with me personally, not necessarily the matters that we have on hand, the sprinkled donuts, right? So what my personal privilege is, I'm cold, shut the door. You know, the draft is coming there, shut the window. It would be appropriate for someone to say, Laquan just said something nasty about Melissa. And you would address this to the chair, by the way. Do not address it to Laquan, do not address it to Melissa. Address it to the chair and say, if you want to call it a point of order, it really doesn't matter so much what you call it. It's not anything to do with the business at hand. But you say, I would like to bring to the attention of the chair that there is an inappropriate discussion going on, which the chair would bring the whole thing to order.
Okay. So with that, I want to skip, thank you. I want to skip to board decorum because you talked a little bit about that, about having no home training. And then we'll maybe go back up to the primacy of rules. Let's talk about board decorum and resolving chapter strife. What are some of the steps we can do, or what steps a chapter could take to resolve chapter strife, particularly as it is occurring during the board meeting, during votes, and the role of the parliamentarian in addressing that?
Right, so this is where the the parliamentarian plays a huge role in ensuring that everything is, the meeting is running in order. So pretty much, the parliamentarian interprets the rules and advice and give the president and officer advice on parliamentary procedures and the chapter's bylaws. And if I know some bylaws would have like a code of conduct, but if it doesn't, maybe the board could create a code of conduct with various rules governing on how members should behave. One of the ones that I stressed earlier is that chapter board members or members in general should not speak over the chair. It has often I've seen it happen at like a lot of meetings. And that is something that you just don't do. It's really rude to speak over the chair, So I would say any chapter could create a code of conduct, to help maintain order.
Okay, Robin, thank you. Did you want to add to that, Robin?
Well, I would totally agree with that. It could be written down, or I'm not sure how many do have it written down, but it could be expressed when you walk in a room that, this is how we comport ourselves. But something that probably, if not, is written down in so many words is all of us join the National Association of Black Journalists, or our local chapter, right? So it's assumed and it is expected that you are there for the purposes of the National Association of Black Journalists or your local chapter of Black journalists, which means promoting diversity, particularly of Black people in the newsroom. It means helping for jobs. It means all the stuff that we stand for, right? So if this disagreement happens because somebody thinks that they should be able to work for a tobacco company or something like that and sell cigarettes at a meeting, that goes against the purpose of the stated purpose very clearly of the National Association of Black Journalists. And one provision that is in many of the bylaws and is definitely in the national, and I know because I drafted it and it got approved and it's in there, is that all memberships are subject to review by a membership committee. And that's exactly what it means. It doesn't mean that we're police and we're going to come and throw you out, but it means that people who join this join because they are professing adherence with our basic principles. And if they work against our basic principles, obviously we would prefer that they're not part of the organization.
So what are
that's
your
draconian, but notice it says that all memberships are subject to review. You signed up, you agreed to that, and therefore enforced.
So that's I guess the threat or the penalty if someone is a repeat disruptor. The recourse for the chapter would be to revoke that member's membership, and it'd be harder if that person was a board member because you have to have a whole big vote, correct?
I would say that should be the last resort. That should
right.
be the last resort. I would also recommend that once someone signs up to become a member, you should definitely hand them a copy of the code of conduct and have them aware of those rules.
Okay, thank you. Madison Carter, new president of the Buffalo chapter, asked the question, what happens if the chair cedes the floor to a member and then needs to end that discussion? Is it rude for the chair to interrupt too?
That's a good question. The chair never cedes the floor. The chair is always in control of the conversation. The chair is allowing the member or the speaker the opportunity to speak. And that's conversation or not conversation, actually, whatever that person is speaking should be directed to the chair. So you don't, remember I had Melissa and Laquan, and they were having some issue going on. Melissa should not turn to Laquan and saying, you never supported Black Water Blues, That should go to the chair and say, I have concerns that not everyone has supported Black Water Blues, or whatever it is, And so because of that, if you think about that, even if you recognize, that's what the chair does, Laquan, and Laquan starts speechifying, which is fine. Laquan, has every right to do that, but Laquan is telling that to the chair. And so the chair is always in control. At a certain point, the chair could say, there are two things that could happen. If Laquan goes over 2 minutes, the chair could say, I get your point gently, and I think it's time for us to move on, or we understand what your question is, and now we'll discuss it further. Are there other discussions? If you get a long debate with not just Laquan, but Melissa and everybody else has got something to say, the membership may want to suggest at that point a motion to limit debate, which means you could say everyone can speak on the subject once and they get 2 minutes to do so. Any of you who have been to national business meeting know that is usually enforced.
That was one of my questions, the time limit for debate. Is that in Robert's Rules of Order, or is that just something that is just common to have, for each person who speaks, you have 2 minutes to speak during the debate?
It could be any time period you want. So if you look at the room and you've got 6 members there, but it's a really important subject, you may simply, it doesn't have to have a time period. You can say each member can speak on the subject once, right? Because you got time with 6 people. If on the other hand, like the NABJ National, where we got 200 people in the room and everybody's all excited, you can't possibly have everybody speak forever. Just like the Senate and the House. The Senate has a filibuster, you can go on and on forever. We don't do that. So we're more like the House, and we have, generally you would say 2 minutes. Let me say something very quickly about Roberts. It's the second pet peeve. The first one is the friendly amendment that doesn't exist. Please don't use that. Just make an amendment, a normal amendment, and you vote on it like you would anything else. If you say friendly, it has a 50% chance of becoming hostile. So that's why it's bad practice. The second thing is Robert's Rules of Order. If I pulled out, I should have had a copy of it here because I do. A beautiful copy of Robert's Rules of Order. It's dog-eared. You can tell I've used it a lot. And if I held it up and it's about 800 pages, you'd all tremble in your boots, right? And you'd say, he's got Roberts. Well, not really. It's 20 years old. It's the Scott Forsman edition, number 12 or something. It's outdated. So there are many, many, many different rules of order books. Most of them go back to General Henry Roberts at the turn of the last century, who went to a lot of meetings, and he came up with some rules. His book was that thin. Now it's like that. And there are many, many different lineages. One part of his family says they have the official one. So what I say to any organization that says where our rules are silent, you spoke of primacy. So the first rules that take effect are yours. But if your organization is silent about something, like how many terms the president can serve, then I would say you go to maybe NABJ rules, or you may say Roberts 12th edition Scott Forsman, 2017 or something like that. And remember to look at that again, because it will change. Roberts has contradicted itself if you look at the many different lineages. So on the one hand, I'm just some old guy screaming and yelling and having my rant, but believe me, you don't want someone just to say the word Roberts and then the whole room gets silent, because you don't really know that they're citing anything that actually exists.
So the edition that is being used of Robert's Rules of Order, should that be in the bylaws?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Okay.
by the way, you won't hear a lot of people say that. This is my rant, but I say I'm a journalist, and so as a journalist, we wouldn't quote somebody and say that right. We wouldn't treat you know what I'm trying to say. If there was a book out, we wouldn't say race matters. Maybe tens of people wrote books called Race Matters. Could be talking about Cornel West. We could be talking about something else, right? And so you would say Race Matters by Cornel West, and he could have changed his mind. Knowing him, he probably did. And so, you want the latest edition or whichever one it is, particularly, again, if you're talking about a reference book.
And
Okay.
also to add real quick, Tori, to add on what on Robin answer to Madison's question, I think it's also good practice for the chair to, like, during the debate, the chair should let the floor like alternate between those who are speaking in support of like an action item and those speaking against the action item, because at the same time you want to make sure that those in the minority would get the chance to voice their concerns or opinion about something.
Okay, thank you. We've talked about board decorum, best practices and key rules. Best practices and key rules boards should use to maintain order. Was there anything else you all want to add to that? We want to move on to the next point. Talked
I
about
think we
maintaining
said it. Well, pretty much what Corey just said. That is really the single most important thing. The chair is not there to throw their weight around. The chair is there to make sure everybody is heard. All different corners are heard. And so that's exactly what you would do. That doesn't mean the chair doesn't have an opinion. And actually, according to the latest Roberts and many before that, or I should say many books on rules of order, to the surprise of most people, presidents do have a vote, but the president doesn't necessarily use that vote. And in NABJ, our practice, and it is written in our Constitution, the president does not vote. In our chapters, we try to replicate the NABJ Constitution or bylaws. Our chapter presidents usually don't vote. If you're running a meeting effectively, you don't need to have your vote. And in fact, most parliamentarians agree that a president's vote sometimes can be disruptive, because if I get the sense of the room, I have two people, two sides being heard, maybe a third side, and then we say all in favor, aye, and I start raising my hand, that might confuse people or suggest that everybody's supposed to raise their hand or something like that.
But the president can vote if it's a tiebreaker, right? Or does that have to be in the bylaws?
So
I've heard of that before.
In the NABJ rules, the president can vote as a tie, yes.
Okay, thank you. The role of the parliamentarian. So some chapters, they have, as we spoke about before, they have a hard time just getting people just filling their offices. So and what happens in chapters where there's no parliamentarian? Who should those duties go to? Should the president be acting as president and parliamentarian, or should it go to someone else?
It should go to the president. Should be leading the meeting, running it smoothly in all the ways we just described. But if you know there's going to be a contentious issue, and you have your agenda, so it's not a surprise. You know that that meeting was going to be the one where you're talking about that Blackwater ad again that didn't pass last time, and these time you know there's a whole bunch of people there from Blackwater or whatever it is. And so you may want to appoint a parliamentarian. If it's really a serious situation, you might want to find an actual registered parliamentarian, member of the National Association of Parliamentarians. There's 2 parliamentary groups. As journalists, you can find it. If not, we can give you a link to find it. They will cost money, and they will be there as a completely objective, frankly. Most of those members, first of all, most of them are not African-American, and they're certainly not journalists. So they would be, in a sense, you might be getting a completely non-biased source that wouldn't really care whether it was Sprinkles or Backwater State or whatever. And all they would be talking about is rules. But on the other hand, you don't want to hear someone talk about, motion for personal privilege and things like that in all these complicated parliamentary terms either that might disenfranchise your members. So the president, yes, is the person who is running the meeting, wants to keep decorum, has those code of conducts, at the ready to remind people, as Corey said, maybe when you walk in the room, if we know it's going to be contentious, and should be able to keep the decorum if they think that this may go outside of their ken, then they may want to appoint a member as parliamentarian. In that case, it's going to be a little difficult because you really want to find someone who has the appearance of non-bias on this whole issue, whatever it is. And in your membership, that may be hard to find, or who certainly knows parliamentary rules, or in the extreme case, hire someone from the National Association of Parliamentarians. NABJ, by the way, did that, I would say, once in about the last 20 years.
Okay, thank you, Robin. We have 7 minutes left, so I'm going to really quickly have both of our panelists tell you how they can be reached, their social media, website, email, phone if they want to give it out, website, whatever that may be, and then we're going to go back into the discussion. Again, we have 7 minutes left. So Corey, how can people reach you? Social media, whatever, website, whatever you want to provide.
Great. So you can reach me on Twitter at Atkinson, ATKINSON, reports. And my email, corey.atkinson1@gmail.com. And I put my email address in the chat box if you want to reach me.
Okay, thank you. Robin?
And yep, you can, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I have a phone, but all that being said, please use email. I like to try to keep things in one location. And the easiest email address for you, it actually will go to a different address, and so I may respond from a different address, but you can't go wrong with robin@robinwashington.com. Normal spelling, Robin like a bird, Washington like a president, a real one.com.
Okay. All right, thank you. We have 6 minutes left. Again, if anyone wants to ask a question, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A. You can type your question in there, and that will be anonymous, and I'll read it to the panelists. Or if you want to ask your question publicly, you can type your question in chat. Everyone will see it, and I'll read it to the panelists. We've gotten through most of the items on our agenda. Was there anything that either one of you wanted to bring up that we haven't discussed? Either under chapter rulemaking, how to run a meeting, making a motion, bylaws, board decorum?
One thing I'll add to all this is fun. Have some fun. Let it be light. Our mission is like impossible. When I joined the organization 30 some odd years ago, I wasn't in the group that said we could hold the meeting in a phone booth, but on the one hand, we've grown tremendously. On the other hand, the numbers of African Americans in the newsroom, or Black journalists, I should say, not just Americans, has not hit anywhere near what it's supposed to be. And the representation of people of color in the news media is, nowhere near what it should be. So our work continues on and on and on and on and on. That being said, we're all driven for this. We joined this for a reason. And so everybody coming in the room with the exception of that strange person who wants to, again, sell cigarettes or whatever, who doesn't belong there. Everybody in the room, seriously, should be part of this. And so when I say have fun, if you are the chair, if you are the president, or if you're vice president and you lead the meeting every now and then, have a little fun with it. So in a different organization where I'm a chair right now, we have a little routine where I say, and do I hear a motion, Vern? And Vern always says, yes, you did. And did I hear a second, Jennifer? Yes, you did. Right? And then I sometimes mix it up with some other people. So it's like the Vern and Jennifer show. And these are not contentious things, although occasionally it might be. You know, it's a way of sort of turning the whole thing into a performance. And in a way that's light. Again, who wants to be at a meeting for 4 hours? Right? That's not why I joined the organization. I joined the organization to improve the lives of Black people in the media, to improve the lives of Black people represented by the media. And, you know, if it takes me 4 hours at a meeting to do so, so be it. But I really want to come in there if we're talking about the annual meeting or something like that, and whether we're going to have donuts with sprinkles on them. You know, I don't want to take all night to decide that. So recognize the humanity of everybody. They want to get out of there. They want to, that's why Vern and Jennifer do that, by the way. They don't do it because, you know, Robin said, you're the one who's going to make the motion. They want this thing to move along. And everything that I just said, it's like to accept the treasurer's report. There's no reason Vern can't accept it. Except, by the way, on treasurer's report, you don't approve it. You accept it. Approve it means you just swore everything the treasurer said was true. And we don't know that. You're a journalist.
You accept it, not approve it.
That's right.
Okay.
So,
all right. Thank you, Robin. Someone asked a question, can Robin repeat his email address? I see Corey typed it in. It's Robin Burke, BIRKW @gmail.com, right?
well, he typed the Gmail one, which is fine. But the one that you can remember off the top of your head forever is robin@robinwashington.com. So Robin like a bird, Washington like a city or president.com. Once more, robin@robinwashington.com. And I can type that in too.
Okay. Madison asked, we have 2 minutes left, really quick questions. Madison asked, on the reports, the chair accepts or there has to be a motion to accept?
You're saying like on committee reports or?
Committee report, Madison? Or do you mean like the monthly financial report? Oh, she says committee and treasurer.
Yeah, no, it's not the chair accepting. It's the body accepting. So my two people, Vern and Jen, Laquan is the treasurer, and he submits a report, and Vern makes a motion to accept that report. Jen seconds the motion. We discuss it, and then we vote on it. And if it passes, then the membership has accepted the treasurer report, not the chair.
So every report that's presented, or is it, does every report to accept it, does it have to be, you know, with the motion made?
Somebody, the person making, that's a good question. It's good practice. If you have like a treasurer's report, Laquan is a treasurer, Laquan should not be making a motion to accept the treasurer's report because it's like first person, right? So you can, by the way, there's nothing saying you can't in most organizations, in most bylaws. It's just better practice for me to accept Laquan's report or somebody else to accept Laquan's report rather than Laquan.
Okay, thank you. It's now 7:30. I thank everyone for participating. Robin Washington, Corey Atkinson, Angela Holcomb, our executive assistant. Thank you all very much and have a great night. Thanks. I learned a lot here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
That was fun. Thanks, Robin.